Another week, another jab at the media from Donald Trump. Now he's accusing the press of actively ignoring terror attacks. As journalists promptly pointed out, that claim doesn't hold up, but maybe it should. Adam Riley has more.
Even for an administration hostile to the press, it was a remarkable charge. This week, the president said the media routinely suppresses news about terrorism in the U.S. and overseas.
It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it.
Later, White House spokesman Sean Spicer both doubled down and backpedaled, releasing a list of 78 attacks he said were underreported.
It's becoming too often that we're seeing these attacks not get the spectacular attention that they deserve.
Problem is, many of the attacks on that list were covered extensively.
Breaking developments from San Bernardino, California.
I'm Matt Lauer here in Orlando. This appears to be a talking point that is in search of a set of facts that just doesn't exist.
But what if terrorism actually deserves the muted coverage Trump mistakenly thinks it's getting? As the New York Times noted, Margaret Thatcher made that argument 3 decades ago, urging journalists to starve the terrorist and the hijacker of the oxygen of publicity on which they depend. Clearly, the president sees things differently. Judging from the pushback, so does the press.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting take from the New York Times this week because I felt the outrage that most of the media outlets said, what are you talking about? I mean, these terror attacks have gotten extensive coverage. In fact, maybe too much in some cases that were even smaller. But the New York Times is saying maybe you do. Maybe we should starve the terrorists, especially low-level things like that Sudbury guy who was picked up, those kind of things.
Yeah, I don't know that it's really our decision to make. So a story happened, and we say, well, we've been covering this too much. We should stay away from it. I think you have to give each story the weight that it deserves. And if it's something that is just sort of random and we don't need to cover it, then we shouldn't. But I don't think that we should stay away from covering something, even if it happens halfway around the world. If 10 people are killed in an explosion somewhere, I think we need to cover it. That's news.
In the Middle East, we don't even bother anymore.
No, we don't. But I mean, there's total disproportion.
Yeah.
But there are times we do cover some of those, especially, sadly, when there are Americans involved and so forth. It's not as if we're not covering those stories at all.
We're certainly covering them. Right. But, I'll tell you, with the sole exception of the shootings in Charleston, South Carolina a couple of years ago, we really undercover terrorist attacks that don't involve Muslims. But if once there's a connection made to radical Islamic terrorists, as the Trump administration likes to say, then the coverage is nonstop until for quite a while. I mean, we need to find a proportionate way of covering these and to say we're going to and not play up some and downplay others. It's a mess right now.
That may well be true, but his point, the president's point about this was ridiculous. And my take on this was to put out a list with misspellings, by the way, and just so that we would go to our files and show, yes, we did. See how much we covered it? So he can get a chance to see that out there, and then the next thing you know, it's all about terrorists are among us everywhere. And I'm not suggesting it's not a big issue, but that to me is exactly what that was about, and we missed that. It's okay to examine our motives, but come on.
Just to reiterate, I think Dan's point's a good one. That the list of 78, it was notable what was missing from that list were any attacks that weren't related to Islam. And so what do you do about the high school shooting where somebody walks into a high school in Connecticut and that wasn't on the list of 78, so probably Oklahoma City wouldn't have made that list. That, to me, was very telling. The reason that list was put out there was they needed to shore up, they needed to provide some background for the Muslim travel ban.